And good evening, and hope you're all fabulous. Welcome to the Sunday usual weather waffle. Um, Lovely to have your company. Hope you're all fabulous and had a great Sunday, and everything is going great in your land. Um, don't forget, chat's open for questions. Anybody who's there, hopefully to catch you and your company soon. Let's get on with it. We've got plenty to talk about. Oh, I don't know what's going on with it. There we go. Mr. P, Mr. Well, thank you very much for popping in. G'day, Mr. Well. Oh, it says sign in the chat in there, but anyway, I'm signed in. Hello, Mr. Well. We've got heaps to talk about tonight, so I need to stay focused. Lots of things going on inside of the weather spaces. We'll have a quick look at the satellite picture at the moment. Interesting, typical boring winter pattern for us. Pretty much high pressure dominating the whole of Australia. Couple of weak polar lows there, trying to get organised. Bit of a cloud band coming into northwest WA, which is trying to inject some moisture, but the air is so dry. Really is having a struggle at any time getting anything into this continent at the moment. As you can see by the fronts that keep sort of clipping us and is getting shoved to the southeast. You can see there's not a lot of moisture making it north of about the Gulf, Australian Bight and the southern coast, really. Queensland has onshore stream showers associated with that sort of high, and the low we can see wobbling away there, which is sort of riding the top of the high as it builds. We're sort of wedged between two highs here. If I was to actually get them, we'll put the stream. Wonder if you can get isobars on for. Let's have a look. There we go. We probably can't do it actually for satellite pictures, but that's all right. Oh, there we go. You can see what's going on. We were wedged between basically two pretty slow highs, a decent one that's getting off over the Tasman Sea here, and it's not surprising because such cold air sort of been bucketed over there for at least a week. So see, it's nice and stable, and it sort of extends that ridge back into really basically on the Queensland coast right down through Central New South Wales, which is why sort of we're getting this stably sort of not much happening, bit of cloud around at times. That's a bit of moisture trapped in by that ridge really, and then another high building across the west, and in between that some weak frontal activity, but everything has basically been shunted south. It's par for the course this time of year, and doesn't look like breaking anytime soon. We are watching some of the stuff over here, well over in the Indian Ocean towards Africa, but again, it's not showing any signs of sort of breaking up through this quite dominant sort of blocking pattern we're seeing. Otherwise, and there's even really no major trough activity. This is pretty decent trough here, but you can see it's already been shunted southeast by the developing high behind it, and obviously the air ahead of it. And there's really nothing that unstable. In fact, you see here a little cut-off low, and it's more, you wouldn't say tropical, but more warmer core than it is cold core. And you can see quite clearly because the colder air is displaced quite well to the south here, and it's just spinning away on its own. Really not a lot of moisture associated too, and of course the northern hemisphere, the monsoon season is up and running across large swathes of India and obviously Pakistan and obviously Southeast Asia, and then of course we go across to the Pacific, where windy will have some conniptions. You can see that super typhoon here, really out there killing nothing but fish at this stage, but it is heading towards Japan. So I have family in Japan, so I'll keep an eye on that for them. But at this stage, it's well away. And we can see again, basically the southern Pacific is pretty much dead, other than sort of cold front activities. Below that stuff you can see there is high cloud, some surface sort of cloud, but there's really no decent organized activity anywhere to be seen. In fact, there's not even a lot of cold air to be seen. A lot of that surface air is just like maritime sort of stratocumulus and cumulus stuff. There's no real cold air where you see this speckly white crispy stuff, like the popcorn stuff like that. That's the colder air. This stuff here it's cooler maritime cloud, but it's definitely not anywhere any colder stuff that's going to create any sort of decent weather or snow or anything out there, basically. So you can really see the Pacific is definitely getting smacked about by this developing of the El Nino that's plowing way up here. Interestingly, though, you'd think there's a bit of tropical activity now starting to pick up actually in El Nino 1, El Nino 2, and even 3 a little bit, which is interesting. Well, it's supposed to be what we're supposed to see if the El Nino is underway, which that clearly is. And 3.4 over here, and 4 is dead as a door now. Obviously, not unusual. Some tropical activity, looks like a bit of a Kelvin wave or something to the north there, but it's pretty also associated. But you can see that even the typhoon's quite a compact little system. What we normally see in those northern sort of hemisphere sort of systems out of the ocean. Bit of a tropical depression moving into the Philippines there, with some decent strong convection on its western side, but really not much else in terms around the go. Okay, let's get into it. We've got lots to look at instead about what's ahead for us. All right, let's have a quick look at the climate drivers. And we are seeing, of course, an El Nino in the Enzo and the Pacific. And we'll look at the forecast in a second. It's obviously forecast to get into, strong, and some people and some readings put it into, never to be seen before in the history of the universe. But, we think about that. Some interesting movement in the Indian Ocean dipole just in the last week or so. We'll put up those figures soon, but it's actually just jumped up into the positive, which we did flag last weekend in the weekly weather waffle. So if you've been paying attention, you would have seen that we actually did talk about there might be a push into the positive, even though the Japanese were very much still saying it was going to get into go negative and stay negative, which is interesting. But it wasn't a huge jump, but it was a little bit of a skip. We've got the southern NMA, which is just sort of pushing back into neutral, although just sort of hovering around that negative, which has been a bit lately. And obviously we've got a interesting potential stratospheric or polar vortex disturbance. It's not going to be a warming event, but there's definitely EC specialists definitely flagging some disturbance of that vortex. Now that combined with all the other things going on at the moment will definitely throw a spanner in the works in terms of how Enzo or El Nino impacts Australia. So lots happening. Lots happening. And of course, weaker than normal polar winds as well. Really impacts those frontals and those westerlies and stuff coming through. And yeah, could bring some dry weather. Could also bring in other influences. So we'll look at them as we pop out. All right, let's go, and we're going to first up look at obviously Nino 3.4, which is obviously in relation to the Enzo, and this is the latest update just the other day, so it's a good thing. And we've also got Copernicus, which is just updated as well, which is obviously the European climate sort of center, where they sort of group quite a few models, and CFS, of course, is the US NOAA organization's model. And you'll see quite a bit of difference when I show you very soon in forecasts. And CFS, again, is still definitely maintaining. It's got El Nino now up to almost, that's 1.5 plus 1.5 days, which is still, it's only just a weak to moderate. So it's not even, and it's still capping it off at about 2.25 now. And then rapidly weakening as it gets into late spring and early summer, which is in itself, you can see here it peaks in pre-November and then starts to weaken quite rapidly into December and into summer. And so you can see here that's not all over Red Rover before summer, sort of mid onward summer and into autumn in terms of rainfall. So anybody who wants to tell you otherwise, there's a whole different picture coming from different models. So keeping an eye on that. As I said, it was a few Sundays in a row now, you can see this sea surface temperature pattern also definitely looking very much in terms of what we call a Mordecai, which is, like an El Nino, but it's a bit more in the no 1 zones. Oh, better put that down. I was going to get feedback. I'm just trying to see what's going on with the chat. So it seems to be disappearing. Sorry about that. But yeah, you can see it does pulls those anomalies, those warm anomalies, way back towards the South American sort of and the Central American coastlines, as opposed to sort of keeping that tongue out here, which you can see, which is the classic El Nino for the next few months anyway. But you can see quick rapidly turns into a butt plug there and then pulls it right back. So something worth watching in terms of there's going to be a multi-year event for this, or it gets washed out. But it's certainly not going away for them, but definitely for us, its impacts are going to weaken substantially as we move through summer. Rightio, let's pop into now and have a look at 3.4. Now, this is the Copernicus, which is the European one, and you can see already the complete difference in models here. I'm just going to detach that, and I can put them side by side so we can see. Where's pretty that? I mean, look at the difference there in terms of, can't make that sort of, but you can see even in here, the Europeans are going for, sorry, chat, but yeah, good, it's not hard. Some models in the Copernicus ones are going for like plus 4.5, which is, I mean, outrageous. The Bureau's even going for plus 3.5 to plus 4. Compare that to the CFS NOAA, which is plus maximum plus 2.25. You're talking about half of the anomaly difference, and it's bizarre for a start. I mean, models will have their various takes and things, as we know, in our experience from the day-to-day weather models, but for climate models to be this diverse is going to be a very interesting period ahead. And I think that's pulled out and shown when we look at the precipitation stuff, which is coming up soon. But yeah, the Europeans are definitely going for a very strong event here. And it's basically made up of, you can see there's Bureau, there's a Europe, there's an American one there, but you can see the CMC, which is the Canadian one. You can see JMA, which is the Japanese. EC, of course, we know DWD, which is also known as ICON, which is the German. Two ECEs, and you can see obviously Meteor France, but guess who that belongs to, and UK Met. And I think ERR5, I think that's the actual what happened in real time. I think that's the mapping. So I think that's what ERA5. I think it is. Yeah, the actual value, real FA that happened. But yeah, you can see here quite an interesting. And it's still interesting here, even on the this split here between all the models. You can see the brownie color, which is NCEP, which is the American stuff. You can see the green, which is the UK Met. They're actually quite down where CFS is. So you've got three models, and then you've got like the CMC, which is Canadian, which is always a bit excited. And then well above that, you've got, disappointingly, the Bureau, which is up there with the hottest. And you've got JMA, and then you've got EC. One of the world's leading models, which is obviously EC, JMA, which is quite a good regional model, but we know it's got it wrong in terms of the IRD already. So, if you've got IRD wrong at this sort of short range, you can put a pretty big question mark or asterisk next to it regarding the Pacific and ENSO. But there's still a real split even in here with the group below and the group above. But man, that's a pretty wide split. It's pretty much like tonight's minimum temperatures. There's like a 6 to 7 degrees split between Access C and I think EC was actually the warmest night. Like I think, well, maybe was it GFS anyway? It was one of the 13 or 14 degrees. So I mean, unusual. All right, come look at the SSTs, anomalies, which is the sea surface temperature global anomalies at the moment. We can have a look here thanks to the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. And you can see these are the anomalies. They're not actual temperatures, don't forget. So you can see that tongue of ENSO warm water there, the El Nino developing. You can see it coming out of classic Nino 1 zones, which is just off South America. And there's that warm water pools in terms of in relation to obviously the trade winds in the Pacific being there's easterlies and southeasterlies being very weak, and in turn the westerlies pushing warm water across and sort of pulling against the Central and South America. You can see here very much sort of hitting its tracks there and getting quite pretty organized at this stage. You can see this is from May to so the last 90 days. So it's definitely getting excited in terms of that El Nino. You can see here the western end still though is still a bit of, we can see that typhoon activity is definitely fighting back in terms of, especially for Nino 4 and probably the very western edges of Nino 3, with some cooler water actually developing as a result of those typhoons. So that's going to be interesting to watch, because don't forget, one of the features of El Ninos is westerly wind bursts, which is these west winds that come from the west. And if you're just going to be pushing this cooler water across into those enso zones there, it's be fascinating to see just what the outcome and consequences are. And you can see a lot of this cold water up here that's been sort of flashing up and down as well, is a consequence of a couple of major typhoons that have been up through China and Japan and the Philippines in the past few weeks. Definitely creating some surface cooling. You can see pretty much the pattern there of that major typhoon that went through and barreled into, it was pretty close to Shanghai, wasn't it? Just south of Shanghai, somewhere in China, but brought some pretty nasty weather there. I think I even saw some video footage of a child being sucked out of a house or something, or blown out of the house by the winds associated with the typhoon. So definitely some decent winds. All right, let's go across to the Indian Ocean dipole, or the IOD as we know. And we also know that negative IOD is good for us in terms of rainfall, good for us in terms of moisture availability, perhaps. And then obviously positive is bad for us in terms of moisture availability, obviously lower moisture availability. And we are seeing it just bob into positive just by about 0.01 degree, well, you go 0.04 degrees. So 0.4 is really the arbitrary line where they start to say, okay, it's turning to be a positive IOD, but don't forget there's this consistent, persistent values as well. Not just a brief dalliance into positive territory, but it is showing signs. You can see here pretty dramatically across late June and into July. It's gone from cool neutral, so we call it, into warm neutral, and sort of just poking its head now into that positive territory. So that's definitely something worth watching. I guess one of the good things is that we're heading into the territory now where this starts to become less relevant. Obviously, we've still got September and October to go, so that definitely very relevant for those terms. But as you start to get into late November, it becomes less relevant, as other, the Hadley cells, Walker circulation, ENSO start to take control, and obviously the North Australian monsoon as well, and the heat low that develops over northwestern WA or northwestern Australia, in terms of that, start to drive things. But yeah, this is something worth watching, and it's pretty definitely, we pointed out last week that it may be a possibility too, because you could see that difference in the cloudiness over the Indian Ocean between the area waters off the northeastern sort of Africa, the Horn of Africa there, and then of course off northwest WA, south of sort of Bali, Indonesia there, was pretty cloud free. So keeping an eye there. At this stage, it's still considered neutral, but it's starting to get warm neutral anyway. It's starting to get up into that positive territory, which is not a good fact. And then we've got SAM, or Southern Annular Mode, and this is obviously a more dynamic, sort of more like a week-to-week type driver. Or you've got the IOD and ENSO, which are definitely more like weeks to months type drivers. And you can see the latest value just a couple of days ago was minus 0.76, which is just below negative territory, where they consider the SAM negative 1. And then you can see, obviously, positive territory is positive 1. Strangely, that. And we can see for quite most of the time, sort of late May, right through June, and into basically just last week, it was strongly positive for a while. And then we had that brief, well, not a brief, but it's been what, 4 days into negative territory there. So be interesting to see just about what the SAM does this time of year. And I'm gonna have to try. I don't need to put these write these notes down for myself to remember myself. But positive is we see more frontal activity, and then negative is obviously the fronts get pushed out. Or the other way around, we get more northerly. I think that's it. Is in negative is we get more sort of northerly rain type events, where we get more sort of moisture from the coral sea, or southern coral sea, sort of pushing on shore. Those onshore flows. I hope you got that right. I always get the sequence, because the weird thing about SAM is there's actually 4 fluctuations of it too. So, and it's not based on obviously calendar. It's based upon those sort of seasonal transitions. So it could be towards the end of winter, but it actually could be starting to reflect a spring SAM. So it sometimes catches you out, but definitely I think we're still dead in the middle of winter. I think definitely that's positive SAM there is definitely reflected. That's more front penetration, which obviously resulted in dry weather for us. Of course, we get those fronts as they push across the Great Dividing Range and dry out, and we get the downstream crappy events, dry air. Um, and then, of course, not unsurprisingly, we've had sort of a bit more sort of onshore flow, and SAM's a negative. All right, and then we're going to quick look at this. I'm going to make that a bit bigger for you guys. I flagged at the start there that was that EC was flagging a disturbed Antarctic polar vortex, which can definitely have quite significant impacts upon frontal activity, the development of SAM, and also the IID as well. And then there are some obviously downstream teleconnections with ENSO and the polar vortex as well. It doesn't directly influence it, so I'm not saying that at all. But there is things that Rossby waves, which get generated by ENSO, that can and do impact upper air pressures on upper air as well, and temperatures, which can impact upon the polar vortex. And what we're seeing here is basically these are the zonal winds. So really, this time of year, you want to see really strong sort of winds, because obviously the polar vortex is nice and tight. It's obviously very cold. It's the strongest time of year for it, and we're seeing it's sort of strengthens a bit, but then it's we have quite a dip away here towards mid-August, which is interesting. So keeping an eye on that, that means that the vortex is being displaced or disturbed by something. And I'm not saying it's warming at this stage here, but you can see the consequence zonal winds actually really ease right off, which again will definitely bounce the SAM probably up into positive, negative, well into negative territory, because again, positive SAM means that those westerlies are, polar westerlies are reaching us. So we kind of expect maybe a northward sort of moving coastal trough, or some moisture onshore flow maybe mid-August. We'll keep an eye on that. It may give us at least opportunity for some sort of rain, but don't hold your breath. Actually, that's September. Sorry, that's one way. This is 6 weeks ahead. I thought it was like Saturday the 19th, but no, that's September, because September starts there. So you can see a dip here again. So this dip here, no doubt surprises there, fluctuations there. We got that bit of a sort of onshore flow, and you can see it strengthening again quite here through to sort of late August, and then September it starts to weaken as it comes down here. So that's where we need to go see. Probably the dates in the bottom might be better. So yeah, well there you go. So September's looking to be interesting in terms of that sort of downstream effect, and they normally takes about a week depending on how strong that sort of crash is. But you can see here there's definitely a very strong weakening of those winds. I mean, there is a normally around that time of year you start to see a slowing trend or an easing trend, because obviously it starts to shift towards it's starting to become spring, and we start to see transition of the Hadley cells start to move back south again. Of course, the northern Australia, northwestern Australia starts to heat up, but we shall keep an eye on that. All right, let's go into what August has to bring for us now. We've got definitely that warmer finish, no surprises there, but still some westerlies popping around. Temperature-wise, we'll look at them again, but it's obviously trending to a bit warmer, and that's just overall. I would say that the days will be warmer, but the nights will be cold, because we've got these dominant high pressures. So obviously the warmer days will pretty balance out whatever sort of cold nights we get. Again, trending towards a little bit drier. But we've sort of discussed that for a few weekends and Sundays now. We all know that sort of, August was looking a bit maybe drier at one stage, and maybe second half a bit wetter. But that Antarctic disturbance as well, the polar vortex disturbance, does maybe tend to indicate maybe a bit of a dash into September there, a bit of water, but we'll see. Still going to be a few fronts and may get some showers. We're not looking, unfortunately, at any sort of major event. And again, this also is pretty impacting upon ECLs as well. I don't think this stage, tend to, in those transitions between sort of either neutral or even La Nina into El Nino, you can get that sort of period where there's a good window of opportunity for ECLs, but this year it just hasn't happened. There's just the upper patterns have been great, surface patterns have been crap, and then when surface patterns have been great, upper patterns have just not been supportive. It's just like they're just not lining up, and it continues to look that way especially if those that the polar vortex is going to be sort of disturbed. Yeah, those upper winds will again sort of push around, which you really need that the jet stream to be quite active and dragging across us and towards obviously towards the polar areas for us to get really that response for cyclogenesis and bombing of these seals that you want to see. This will tend to not do that. It'll tend to displace the jet stream. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, pressure's looking high and normal. So at this stage, August is looking as it started, which is nice, mild days, cold and very cold, clear still nights, plenty of fog around the west, and potentially moving to the coast if you get those overnight winds easing off. And one of the reasons why is too is because you have more northerly or northeasterly sort of on even almost like a sea breeze, which is that ridge effect of an afternoon, and obviously it picks up just enough moisture to sort of let it pool across the basin. And of course, as night cools, that moisture has got to go somewhere, so it condenses and there we go, fog, fog, and fog, and so I think we'll see plenty more of it to come, especially in those sort of low-lying valleys and rivers that we saw this morning, which is such a great satellite picture. You can see you could even trace exactly where Warragamba Dam and stuff was because the fog was just basically confined to the water. Um, but yeah, I think we're going to be seeing some sort of increase in fire dangers pretty sort of mid to late August too. So something to keep an eye on, especially if you're in the west of Sydney with some properties that stuff or close to, scrub of vegetation. I would imagine that the fire brigade, what are they called? Is it RFS or that rural RFS? Anyway, will be obviously planning back burning when they can, coming off. The thing they're going to have and the difficulties they're going to have, and for us especially, people who have to breathe the air, is that the pattern we've got at the moment, there's not a lot of wind. There's not going to be a lot of wind to push the that smoke away. So while it's good for back burning off because it's going to help control fires, not let them get out of control. It's also going to pull that smoky air like we had a few weeks ago, and with then that nighttime radiational cooling plus that inversion sort of capping things. That smoke is going to hang and hang and hang and be quite thick and choking, especially if there's going to be fog, because it'll trap those smoke particles very effectively near the surface. So big thing to watch out there. And I don't envy the RFS in having to organise that, I can say. Um, August precip. So again, we're going to look at some contrasting images here. So there's obviously CFS. You can see CFS is going sort of a general neutral. That slab, well, in Queensland there, and that's obviously that moisture starvation coming in from the tropics and Coral Sea as rain starts to kick in. Bit of moisture trickling in across WA, but not real lot there. You can see really strong anomalies across the south here, which is interesting, and that's again those fronts being deflected because of the SAM and possibly even indicative of that vortex disturbance as well, because as we explained before, that they do often stop those westerly wind bursts getting further north, which is what obviously southern areas need in terms of winter, bring that moisture, and not going to get that. Would obviously these rainfall anomalies or deficiencies are a result of that. Interesting sort of blob here on the New South Wales coast. I think that's definitely again connected with the SAM activity and also again the lack of westerlies, so it's allowing sort of more northerly events and sort of onshore flows, probably a trough maybe, but it does look more like a sort of a ridge of high pressure sort of pushing some decent onshore winds, but it's not really massively in the positive anomaly side. I think there's maybe 0 to 10 sort of brushing us there, so nothing to get excited about, but again, it's better than being dry. So, um, especially with spring coming up and the driest time of year, which is August anyway, in September and sort of October period. So, um, all right, and then we're going to look at now at Copernicus. I'll make this a bit better for you then. So that's just hot off the press. And we can see here with their combination of, what is it, I think eight models, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I think 10 models, and with that flavor we introduced before, they're really going for not a dissimilar pattern, probably a bit more lower resolution here than CFS does have, but you can see Generally speaking, they've got that sort of greeny blob there, and generally average conditions. But again, remind you that average across these areas this time of year is basically 0 to 0.5, something like that. So it's not overly yeah, encouraging in terms of rainfall, but uh, lack of moisture here. And we'll, same in WA. So basically, the southeast Queensland stuff and the southwest WA are pretty all lined up in the models. It's just the New South Wales coast, and you can see CFS if we pull it back. Did have some of this. It was just that little patch here where Copernicus pulls that patch more off into the Tasman. So, it's pretty much line, agreement there for August, which is good. We want to see. So, not surprising us, I guess, at all. So, I guess the summary for August is going to be average to a little bit below average in terms of rainfall, and obviously a little bit warmer as usual, given that we've got clear skies, those milder days, very cold nights. Um, but let's hop into September. So, spring, what we love. We spring stormy time of year for us. We can see obviously the models are leaning towards warmer, no surprises there. And that's just on the other side of dry from average. So again, pretty much what we saw. But moderate confidence in these because this is where we start to get some divergence in the climate models between CFS and a few others. Temperature back up, I think you're probably wondering why I give CFS any sort of airtime. It's updated every day. And so I tend to think that a model update every day, if there's going to be some sort of irregularities or, outliers in the model outputs, they'd be corrected and adjusted. And that's why I think CFS is reasonably relied upon because it can be adjusted, whereas the Copernicus stuff is they're one-off runs you get once a month. Like a static point in time. We've seen already examples this year where it's been dramatically wrong. So, but we always throw all the ops because we always give you everybody the picture. So we're just going to pick on one little nice colored picture and throw it up. Of course, all models going for it to be warmer than average. Surprise, surprise. And again, that's probably going to be daytimes, and night times will still be cold or very cold, as highs dominate. The broad range signal, of course, again, is leaning towards drier than average, but there's no strong, nasty sort of signals yet. It's not even into moderate. So, still going to get some rain, but it'll be just sort of sporadic events. Pressure, though, is showing, quite strong high pressure anomalies, which is, again, reinforcing, very fine, settled conditions, which we've seen previously. Increased in fire dangers again, especially winds in early September, I think, or mid-September. The pressure anomalies do tend to indicate we may get some sort of winds, towards the end of August, early September. Those westerlies that we do love, as the sort of the polar vortex wobbles around, but also sort of some fronts push a bit further north. So there'll be, again, keep an eye on. CFS again, pretty much showing that pattern of that moisture starvation, and you can see that little green patch up there is probably maybe one decent front, so I wouldn't get too excited about that. But generally speaking, the country's starting to look, sort of just below average as the moisture gets starved from, but not only the west and sort of pretty southwest, but also now the northeast as well. Yeah, it's part of the course. We have wet years, we get dry years. But yeah, September is looking pretty warm, and I would say fire dangers are pretty definitely high at this stage too. So just if you've got obviously adjacent to bush for like into scrub and bushfire prone areas, make sure you have your plan organised, ready to go. Not saying anything, not being dramatic. It's always the base. You should be prepared. All right, let's go and have a look into what Copernicus, which again the global conglomerate of basically match and match for CFS. In fact, I was going to drag CFS out and show you side by side. We love to see this sort of homogeny between them. Look at that. It's almost chat there, but it's almost a cut and paste. Again, which also goes to when we look at what comes up next. Ooh, put that back in there. In terms of out of September, rainfall for October and onwards. that raises even more eyebrows, let me tell you, because if they're pretty homogeneous for the next 2 months, August and September, then obviously they're picking up the same signals. And then from October, sort of October onwards, they diverge. And that takes me back to here because you can see here September, October, November, it starts to definitely to peak and to flatline. Whereas if you look into this model, these model range anyway, you can see they don't have it sort of peaking till sort of December probably, and then starting to flatline. So that period of 6 weeks can make a pretty significant difference. And of course, obviously the depth of the anomaly here between +3, +3 to +4.5, ridiculous. And I definitely think that's definitely going to is influencing their precipitation and temperature outlooks post sort of Octoberish, Novemberish, as we'll see. All right, let's go on to October. Let's go October again. The confidence for both models about it being warmer is very strong, and in fact, it's going to be pretty warm. And if I was to pull up, I think the anomaly is looking at plus 1.75, something like that, in +2, so it's pretty swung one way. And again, this is not surprising. We saw even with CFS's values with El Nino, it's really kicking into gear in October, which is when we're going to notice the moisture deprivation. We're going to notice its influence starting to really take hold the most. Obviously, that brings consequences, some increased fire dangers in obviously drier, below average rainfall type things. But interestingly, maybe not in terms of precipitation, because this is also when we're going to see if there's any downstream effects from this polar vortex disturbance or displacement that we've just sort of flagged that EC's been sort of going on about as well, because this is when you'll start to see some of the downstream effects from it, and also whether the IOD gets into that sort of positive territory or not, or goes back, and what's happening with SAM. There's a whole lot of other sort of stuff going behind the scenes. So a very complicated slash complex end to the year in terms of climate drivers, and it may come down to what's happening locally in the SAM. And there's a brand newie that I'm going to put out too. I was researching this afternoon. It's called the Pacific South American Oscillational Dipole, and it really just focuses on the impacts of the southern Pacific and sea surface temperatures. And it has two phases of it, which I was fascinated about. It has a very dynamic sort of short-term phase and then a longer-term phase as well. And they've both been both recorded to impactors. So, perhaps we're seeing lately more the consequences of that as opposed to anything else. And perhaps, it's what is our main driver in terms of that rather than Enzo. Enzo is maybe a summer top up, but other times of year it's a combination. I'm talking about Eastern Australia. There is a combination of this PSA plus the SAM as opposed to the IOD, which is more WA or Western Australia type stuff. So looking into more about that, feel free to Google yourself. There's not a lot of public or helpful, friendly sort of information out there. It's a lot of papers, scientific papers and journal stuff. And even if you look up images, there's not a real lot of images that explain it, like you can get for Enzo or IOD or SAM, for example. So I'm looking at maybe putting something together to give us a bit more of a sort of layperson view about that, because it's piqued my interest because it could explain some of the gaps that we see, or in the outcomes and consequences we see sometimes when there's zero climate drivers, other climate drivers that we're aware about. So, but not surprisingly, high pressure systems, warm, rah, rah, rah. We're starting to get a bit of a wetter tilt though, and this is where the models start to diverge quite significantly, as you'll see when I flick up. All right, let's look at precip. You can see here, again, CFS really starts to diverge here, and I think that's not because CFS is on any sort of inappropriate or illegal drugs or stimulants. I think it really comes down to how they interpret Enzo when they see it weakening in the signal from Enzo, as well as others drivers as well. And of course, the impact of that, the polar vortex disturbance or displacement. I think they're having different takes. So it's not that one's dramatically wrong, one's dramatically right. I think it's that they've got a different perspective. And so they're running with that. And this is where it's going to become very difficult to forecast for anybody from October onwards. Well, not the Bureau will just go hot, dry, as they always do. But anybody who's got any sort of integrity about them will want to question this and say, Well, yeah, CFS has been pretty damn right recently, and if CFS and these climate models from the European Copernicus Center agree for August and September, why? What is causing this sudden divergence in October? And as I said, don't forget CFS is updated 4 times a day, whereas these ones in Europe's, those ones are only updated once a month. So you have a static period once a month, something that's dynamic, updated daily. Yes, both can have the data corruption issues, especially if you're updating data, you get like one little error that does propagate and obviously increases in error across the time as the data is run. But that can be sort of filtered out and identified and removed, and the models can be rerun. You get one little error in these monthly stuff once a month. That's it. It sits there until the next month, the first of the next month. So I don't know, it's weighing up. I guess this is where you sit down and you have to sort of then look at the patterns and stuff, and you think, okay, well, what's the most likely outcome, and maybe toss a coin sometimes. But you can see, I mean, the biggest difference here is that obviously CFS is having decent moisture coming in from that sort of northwest, and that says some frontal activity. It says maybe a Rossby wave as well, because you can see the way the pattern is. It's very linear, so like northwest to southeast, which tends to indicate trophy sort of behavior. And I'm sort of not leaning towards sort of confident activity here because you can see the very tip of Southwest WA still remains in anomalies. Now that could be because this is across the month, don't forget, so that's accumulated anomalies, and this may happen at the start of the month and then get no rain for the rest of the month, and it may happen at the end of the month. A whole range of sort of things add up. The other thing too is the increase in moisture on the east. Now that looks very trophy in terms of a signal, obviously just hugging the eastern side of the Great Dividing Range, right from basically the sort of mid-north coast right down to the Victoria New South Wales border too. But it's dry west of the Great Dividing Range, which tends to indicate that there's lack of moisture coming in from here. So it's all sort of very confusing in terms dry southeast Queensland, okay, central Queensland, okay, even North Queensland, just a little bit of some negative anomalies here. Not surprising that we're starting to see negative anomalies over the top end, because this is when the wet season does kick off on the 1st of October, and obviously October is more a month about storms, and isolate a couple of storms, and you can see here there's a pattern already saying top end is it's going to be dry to start your year, your wet season, which is but then we go to Copernicus, and you can see again it's not that dissimilar to what we've seen. I think again this one is, if I go back and show you this, did I just pull the wrong thing out? Yeah, but we can put up CFS. Oh, now I've got rid of the whole lot. Let's make it bigger. I just want to put them side by side for you. You can see here over chat. It's not dissimilar. Except the main thing that variance is this area here, of course, off eastern New South Wales. And again, this could be that difference between a monthly run outlook and a weekly updated outlook. But there is the biggest disparity between the two. The rest of it's pretty much on. We can see here this patch of positive anomalies over sort of that, what do you say, central sort of south. I don't know how you would even describe that part. It's not really not southwest WA, and it's not really not central Australia. It's pretty sort of central southwest WA. I don't know, but not dissimilar. Pretty much average across. You can see there's negative anomalies starting at the top end. We've got negative anomalies there across Cape York. To me, this is a bit of a smoothing issue. It's obviously not as high a resolution as the CFS is, and that's why you're getting some of this stuff smeared here. But this is not a resolution issue here. This is definitely a change of direction for those models here, as opposed to this change of direction. So you can see it's almost the opposite. They're going for an intensifying pool of negative anomalies, and this is going for an intensifying pool of positive anomalies. So that will be definitely something to keep watch on. But that also can indicate too the way that this is sort of hitting the coast. There could be storm related troughs, really nice sort of decent east coast troughs for the time, anchored on the great Dividing Range, some onshore flow, some decent moisture coming off a warmer Tasman Sea. Bang, good storm outbreaks, couple of storm outbreaks, then you could easily make your October rainfall, because don't forget it's reasonably low. I think it's like 40 or 50 millimeters average. So 2 or 3 decent storms and you've made your average up easily. So and they're not significantly large anomalies either. You can see here it's between 10 and 30 mils mostly. So something to keep an eye on. Something a bit more than the dry, boring sphere. But again, 90% in agreements, maybe 80% agreements, 20% and obviously the key area is this area which interests us the most. So we're keeping an eye on that. Um, let's go into November. Okay, so this is where they really start to diverge. And this is, I think this is where we get quite a few downstream effects. I think this is where we've seen CFS starts to really peak El Nino, and we see where this is obviously again. This is where we'll see downstream effects from any sort of polar vortex disturbance if it continues, or any change in those zonal winds that we looked at before. Because well, obviously any sort of teleconnectors, obviously any Rossby waves that come off ENSO, El Nino. What's it going to do with the upper atmosphere as well? Like it doesn't directly obviously change or impact it, but it does have these planetary waves that come out of it as well that relates to from convection of activity, from a lack of convection activity, all that sort of stuff. This is where we start to see those things accumulate and start to come to the surface. And this is where we'll get to see just about where this El Nino takes us. But you can see up, no doubt warmer. This is the fascinating thing for me, and we'll look at those in a minute, because this is where they really take. So yeah, what I looked at also the geopotential height and which is the air pressure difference between 850, which is near the surface, obviously up to 200, which is where the most, well, not all the weather takes place, and well, the stuff that drives the weather and creates obviously long lasting weather, or decent storms, that sort of stuff. That's where it comes at, and you can see where those anomalies are, and whether it's going to be higher or lower pressure and bits and pieces like that. And it definitely has a stormier sort of signal for November. So cross our fingers. But again, that's models for you. But with the combination of things that are going on, it definitely could be, they won't be like frequent, but when they do, it'll be severe storm outbreaks, and some real heat waves as well, especially as obviously El Nino sort of really ramps up. Let's have a look at the rainfall out there. You can see why I've been saying quite a long time now across these few slides that this is where they start to diverge, and you'll see very soon what I'm talking about. Well, you can see very, here CFS is, and we've seen this now for 3 weeks. So every weekly waffle on Sunday, CFS has pretty much had this from that sort of November, sort of December period, if you recall, and it's been consistent. Like when you get consistency like this, it's clearly picking up a pattern. Whether it's correctly picking up that pattern or not, I guess we'll find out. But we're going to see real divergence here in terms of the Bureau will come out and say it's hotter and drier, because obviously there's a bit of turf defending going on there. But I don't know. These are just not, it's not like it's light green. Like there's strong anomalies here, especially so that interior WA, across the centre, and even in terms of the north coast, and even across us. You're looking at there between getting 30 to 50 mils sort of anomalies. And when November's rainfall, I think, is what, 60, maybe 40, 50, 60, something like that. You're talking about 30 to 50 mils. You're talking about, what's that, a 60, 70% increase, extra rain. So that's a pretty significant slab of additional precipitation that this is picking up. This CFS model is picking up. So there's a very strong hint there that there's something at play that these guys really aren't interested in. But the other thing is that look at that inland and I'll make it larger again, but look at Western Australia, not Western Australia the state, but Western and Central Australia. And if we go back to CFS again, look at that. So the anomalies there aren't far off. I mean, there's obviously a 5 to 25 mils, but then you think about CFS, 5 to 25 mils is the very light shaded green to sort of that darker green. So that's pretty much that 5 to 25 mil shading we can see there. And there's obviously bands that get up into that sort of 50 mil down here. But generally speaking, they're very close. In terms of this area, it's this area over here where, again, we have that disparity. And I think this is where they really are, CFS is really taking a different direction in terms of exactly how the moisture from ENSO is deprived, or how it interacts. And it's obviously some other feature, which is why I brought up that Pacific South American oscillation, or dipole, I'm not sure exactly of what they call it. But maybe this is that consequence, that's the Southern Pacific Ocean taking, influencing us and taking sort of control over the southern part of Australia. You can see that for Queensland, of course, average to just below average. Again, that's that bit of and that lines up with what the Copernicus is saying, the other models are saying, that there's that sort of negative anomaly starting to develop there, and that's definitely an outcome of that sort of moisture being deprived from the Coral Sea. But yeah, for New South Wales, coastal New South Wales, pretty dramatically different outlooks. You can see that's five -5 to -25, so that could be -25. And then you look here, we're up to almost what +50. So you're talking about 75 millimeters difference. I mean, that's a whole month's rainfall. The average, that's a significant difference. So I hope that CFS is right. I mean, because a stormy November would be fantastic. I mean, it's pretty rare that we've ever had one for so long, but I guess we'll see as this rolls out, but there's something worthwhile keeping an eye on in terms of that. But again, it's not really an Enzo pattern either, like a mega end of the world Enzo pattern that everybody's trying to sell us, because we expect these anomalies will be very much across here. There's moisture getting there from somewhere, and even on the across the southern Indian Ocean here, you've got positive anomalies too, which is if there's been a positive Indian Ocean dipole, you think there's pretty moisture starved, but it's not moisture starved. So interesting times. And again, that's definitely says some Rossby wave activity here too, coming off the Indian Ocean, because just the way that pattern is. Um, Early monsoon, no, not yet. You can see it again. There's just the top end and the cross area is still under sort of very weak negative anomalies, but they're still there. All right, so fascinating times. All right, let's pop into December now, and then we'll have a look at questions and bits and pieces. December again, of course, is still warmer, but not as warm. You can see here it's just sort of just above the average, so pretty again low confidence. And given that there's such a diverse and model spread, and it's 6 months out too, so yeah, a once a month run model, yeah, pretty unreliable that far out. This is the interesting thing here. Pretty strong signals coming through again. You'll see in a minute. This is again toss a coin. One aspect is wetter, stormier, but not wetter, stormier, humid. Still heat waves, still pretty warm, but then you get pretty active troughs, severe storm troughs coming through. That'll be fairly chunky and meaty in terms of rainfall as well. So there'll be some regular sort of top up stuff, not just like a 1-4 and then the rest of the month is dry. I still think the start of December will be drier and warmer, and I think we'll see a bit of a switch around, perhaps just a few days before Christmas. Again, if the CFS Nina 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies is the one that comes off, because that's when we start to see that really jump over the cliff edge. And of course, there is a lag period between what we see happening over there in terms of sea surface temperatures, and also what we see here. But if the teleconnections or downstream influences of Enzo, questionable, any sort of slight change in that is pretty going to be easier to overcome. You don't have to wait for these sort of lag periods to sort of wear out. My only big question mark or asterisk against that is about where's the moisture coming from in terms of especially in this scenario. No monsoon at this stage, so you can rule out tropical moisture. In fact, you can see even here negative anomalies across the tropics at all. Warmer air can bring in Indian Ocean moisture too. But again, the Indian has been over here, especially off northwest WA, has been cooler than average. So there's not a prevalence of moisture unless that dramatically reverses. So put a question mark next to that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying I've just got a concern about exactly where this moisture is coming from. And Southern Ocean moisture, it feels lots. It's not cold air doesn't hold a lot of moisture, so it's not going to give unless there's regular fronts, like regular sort of massive fronts. It's not going to give that sort of precipitation anomaly, positive precipitation anomaly like that just from cold air alone. There's some tropical moisture influence from there, but where's it coming from? And that's, I guess, the big key we'll keep an eye on. I mean, it could be dragged in from the Indian with those Rossby waves, absolutely. But just put an asterisk next to that one. This is interesting because this December is the strongest signal in terms of rainfall for both negative and positive. So again, I think its timing impacts what's happening with that El Nino, just how strong it gets. and the downstream teleconnections from that, how it links in with the SAM, the IOD would be weakening this Pacific South American oscillation, whatever it's called, any sort of disturbance in the polar vortex. All this stuff does tend to sort of add up to like a jigsaw puzzle. The Tasman Sea zone is going to be pretty warm, and that may overcome any sort of deficiency from ENSO as well by pumping in plenty of moisture at the surface. Now, the thing is, we all know is that we've had plenty warm Tasman seas for times for a millennia. It's about being able to use that moisture though, and it's about being able to get that or convect that from the surface up into the air to create the rain. So that's the key that we'll be closely watching. Now, if CFS is to believe, then that won't be blocked. It'd be actually reasonably tappable or usable surface moisture. So which will be good for storms and troughs coming across. Again, heat waves, no surprise there, but obviously storm outbreaks, severe storm outbreaks as well. Interesting, and we'll keep an eye on that sort of stuff. And we'll look at this analysis, but I mean, now you can see why we're saying what I'm saying, because this is not, again, just like light shading. It's very strong in terms of positive anomalies. Now, December is starting to get a bit wetter, although it's still reasonably dry in terms, and when you compare it with January, February, March, April, sort of, not April so much because it does tend to get a bit dry. Then June again, we get to that sort of bit of a wet peak again. But I mean, looking in the air, it's probably 50, 75 over us, plus 75 in terms of anomalies, plus the sort of average you get in your December rainfall. You're looking at monthly totals into the 150s there, maybe when you add them all up. Something's happening, and it's not clear immediately from anything I've seen what is it that something is. So that again gives me sort of a raised eyebrow 3. Or if I was John Howard, would it be just one eyebrow? But the Indian, it could be a potential source. I mean, look at those. Well above average anomalies there. So it's like it's going to be a rebound. So maybe that positive ID will just be a very, very weak one. And we get a very strong rebound effect, which that could pump tropical moisture across. But in terms of saying, we don't tend to do very well with moisture coming from the Indian Ocean, on the east coast, that is. So it's, and even though there may be a lovely moist warm Tasman, we still have to get that A onshore and B up in the air to be used by any sort of systems or troughs. So yeah, let's wait and see. But then last and of course not least, we've got the global conglomerate of climate grifters. Climate center at Copernicus. And the stark contrast cannot be any clearer between the two models we've just seen. Generally speaking, sort of average to below average to, almost, very well below average in Northern Australia. And that doesn't surprise me per se, because I think the monsoon will be delayed. So, that sort of top end, Cape York, I don't think it takes Einstein to work that out. There's two very interesting things here that I want to flag with you, that why I believe it's not consistent, and they're problematic. So it already puts a question mark over this. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's questionable, because, and the two things are, first of all, these patches of moisture or above average precip just in the middle of nowhere. Now, over here, their average that sort of time of year is only like 5 or 10 millimeters, so that's no real difference. This is starting into their sort of wetty sort of season, their stormy season. You've got negative anomalies across here for everything, which means moisture is starved, and yet somehow these pop out of nowhere. That's problematic for me, especially where's the moisture coming from? Like, it's not coming from the Indian, because we can see over here it says it's drier. It's not coming from the coral because we see it's drier. It's not coming from the fronts because it says it's drier there. That to me is, it's questionable. If you think I'm saying that's wrong, well, I'm pretty saying it's wrong. But and the other thing too is this area here. Now this is Nino 4 back into Nino 3.3. What the F's going on here? They should be browner than local dog turd in the street. Like, you should not be seeing this significant tongue of pretty strong anomalies, rain precipitation anomalies here. even with Enzo, you still, it's I'm not saying you don't get rain, of course, but you don't get this generally. Um, and that's problematic for me. That's inconsistent, and that raises a red flag about this whole outlook in terms of what the F is it doing? Now, it could be, again, even though it's not saying that from its sea surface temperature anomaly forecast, this could be definitely hinting at it breaking down like CFS has predicted and happening in November sometime. This will definitely be a signature of a monsoon that, sorry, an El Nino that has waned or is on its weakening phase. Absolutely, this will be a signature of that starting to inject moisture across into the monsoon, the tropical areas. It will then start to sort of come down. You do tend to get these bursts of, pretty intense rainfall and flash floods across the tropics when El Nino breaks down, of course. This is pretty inconsistent. It's pretty consistent with that sort of pattern, but it's not consistent with their El Nino 3.4 reading. So who knows? I don't know. This is consistent with what CFS has been saying all along, other than with the big question mark is like where we can see the moisture is coming from the Indian here, but where is it coming from here in November? I mean, it's just starting to here, but where is this moisture coming from? So, I mean, both outlooks, I've got some questions to answer. But in terms of consistency, I guess CFS has been, saying this the whole time. It hasn't fluctuated, it hasn't in any way sort of been changed. It's pretty much wrong with these anomalies the whole time. So I guess we will wait and see. But generally speaking, next few months warmer. Well, we're aware of that. But I think warmer days, still colder nights, pretty through until mid-September. I think then we'll start to see as that heat low across Australia starts to get going and wind up and starts to pull the heat across those areas. I think we start to see some warmer nights there, and then we'll start to see that influence of the Tasman as well at night time because that heat low will suck in air from the east, so we'll start to get that onshore sort of flow. So the land breeze we get during winter, which is where the air that sort of rises over during in the high pressure over winter, then subsides and hits the ground and then flows offshore at night time, which just helps obviously get those really cold temperatures because it's keeping the moisture from the Tasman and that maritime air off the coast and keeping skies clear. That's basically gone as that heat low starts because it starts winding up and sucking air in from the east and sucking air in from the west. It's a massive engine, and of course, there's a lot of hot, dry air for that moisture to get through first, which is why you see no real impacts from it for a long time. But it still happens, and that will start to tend reverse. Those lovely cool nights we've had, when we start to get those horrible, sloppy tropical nights as that process takes place. But yeah, both outlooks for me, where's the moisture coming from? You can't tell us that there's this mega El Nino of death over the Pacific and the Indians in positive IOD phase, which would mean there's no moisture available. Like coral seas constrained, it's subdued, it's not going to be pumping stuff in. I don't know. And the Southern Ocean won't give us any joy. 12-degree waters will give you a little bit of moisture, but ain't going to give you much after that. And then that little bit of moisture will be pretty quickly evaporated as it tries to get through the warmer, dry air that's ahead of it. So we'll just throw a dice and get it out of the road, I guess, and find out where the hell we think it's going to come from. All right, that is it. We'll pop into it now. Let's put the windy back up and have a look at the satellite picture, and we can zoom in a bit to us, and we'll look at what's going to happen locally at this. But it can happen in the background. That's beautiful though. I wish that was coming to us, but you can see even there's not a real lot with it. It's pretty thin in terms of moisture. The cold air is pretty thin. Yeah, it looks pretty. There's this ridge here. You can see the massive pool of cold air out there. This high is just sitting there feasting on lovely lovings that loves it. And the ridge as it bends down the coast basically gives us jack squat. All right, let's go. Question time, peeps. Let's go. What we got today? We got Mr. Well. Hello, Mr. I Go Camping. Lovely to see you. I hope your new supercomputer, which is driving pretty Australian, you pretty need to send it, borrow it, or lend it to the bureau. Maybe get their supercomputer. Mr. Brayley, good evening. Lovely to see you. Thank you for hanging around with it. And I don't know, many questions today. Unless my chat's lagging, which it might be actually, because I noticed before it says sign in to chat on the monitor, but anyway, no chats, no questions. Looks like it's pretty quiet in the old chat today. All right, well, maybe I'm by myself. That's pretty it. No WTAF today. I couldn't really find any decent examples, and no one sent me any examples that they want to have a look at or laugh at. So just don't forget to send me anything you see in your travels during the week where it makes you think, oh my God. Let's have a quick look. Like a question we got from Mr. You were mentioning high pressure systems. Could that also equate to sharper, more productive troughs? Um, it could do. But that all comes down to moisture, as I was saying, like, definitely, that physics principle for every action is an opposite equal reaction. Absolutely. It doesn't necessarily mean it's over you, though. It could be somewhere else. In terms of the atmosphere, so, high pressure over us it definitely means that there's significant low pressure over somewhere else. And of course, we've seen that super typhoon in the Northern Pacific. So, but you think there's a sharper gradient? Yeah. But again, it comes back to what's going to provide the moisture for that sharper gradient to take care of, though, and to use. That's going to be my concern, because those precipitation outlooks are lovely green colors, but where's the moisture coming from to create that rain? Unless there's obviously some, westward or even southward moving events dragging some stuff. I mean, the coral sea's still got moisture. Don't forget me. It's still, what's it, mid-20s, stuff like that. And with dry air coming in, wrapping in off a high that has a long fetch over that water, it can still scoop up plenty of moisture. And if it's warmer and drag across, there's no doubt about that. Just that there wasn't really any indication of that happening. But again, I could say the coral sea would still stay suppressed negative if the the focus of any sort of moisture is across us and not over them. It would still show negative anomalies there. So that's definitely a possibility. And perhaps that's where it's coming from. It's coming out of that coral sea, being dragged across us, from a decent sort of long fetch of a ridge of high, like a high sea game New Zealand maybe, or just even eastern New Zealand, so pushing the ridge right back across the coral sea, but then bending across us into an approaching trough. Definitely could provide plenty of fuel for those sort of systems to fire up. Absolutely. And you definitely get the moisture from the surface up into the air with one of those mechanical lift type situations where the cold air digs underneath the warm air, forces that up into the air. Yeah, can see that sort of eventuating. Absolutely. So maybe answer my own question. If that's the case, bring on those storms because they'll be belters. Colder than negative gear policy. Oh yeah, colder than that. It's been bloody cold. That's it. Is it possible the moisture anomaly could be the remnants of cyclones coming off the Indian Ocean? The one in the November sort of December one could definitely be cyclones in Indian for sure, and then having the leftover systems or even residual cloud bands coming from that, because obviously cyclones will pick up plenty of moisture. Definitely could be, Peter. Good call. And that's with that sort of Enzo setup, when El Nino cyclones tend to hang off out there more, and they don't come near the coast, and they can then get captured by passing fronts. I guess the passing front is the big asterisk, but it could be, a passing a Rossby wave, for example, that sort of grabs a leftover or decaying cyclone mass and drags it across. Yeah, definitely. Good point. Very good point. Indeed, it's happened before. Yeah. I think that was in relation to my sort of previous one about the higher thing, I think. But yeah, both those Mr. Well are correct as well. But yeah, it's going to be a fascinating battle of the models. But the overall takeaway out of all of that is that none of those models, including the European ones, were end of the world, death, drying, bushfire scenario type looks at all. None of them. There was no severe anomalies. There was even no moderate anomalies. There were at the worst low anomalies, moderate, low negative anomalies at worst. Generally speaking, most of Australia, in fact, stayed at the average. Again, at that time of year, the average isn't much, but still, there's no massive negative anomalies if you notice here. So I don't get why the media don't hold the Bureau accountable when they put out that shit saying, it's going to be woe is end of the world sort of stuff. I mean, what is always lost is that time of the year is always drier anyway. It's always drier everywhere except for that sort of southeast Queensland, northeast New South Wales type coast when you start to get some of the storms, if those troughs start to push through. generally speaking, as the Hadley cells pushing down, the feral cells push back down to Antarctica, you get that change of literally a change of season. It's always dry. There's no moisture around. The Hadley cells are moving in. They haven't really had a chance to establish. So there's really no air being sucked in off the oceans. There's no fronts coming anymore with regular depth or strength. So they're not going to be providing anything. That's why it's that beigey caramel, Richie Benaud, the cream, the off-white, the beige jacket type setup. It's because generally speaking, nothing is dominating, nothing is driving. That's why it's dry. It's nothing to do with climate change or nothing to do with Enso or that sort of stuff. It can be definitely enhanced by Enso. But a first year Enso still not really established. No, it's not going to create that many negative anomalies. It's just that time of year. It's drier. It's just that time of year. This is what it is. And you can see that very clearly in those rainfall anomalies. That's why I find the CFS one quite interesting and definitely we will be watching closely because it's bucking a trend. It's saying, yeah, I know it's that time of year, but there's actually going to be systems coming through that actually can counteract that and are strong enough to actually deliver. So, and for widespread areas too, not just like the one-off area, like a little pot here, a little pot there. It's it's a widespread positive anomaly. So, interesting times ahead. Uh, That's all right. All right. Well, I'm going to head off now. We've been sort of yapping along. There's lots of stuff to cover there tonight because it was a brand new month, so I had to run through it all for you. No WTAFs, no questions. That's it. But thank you so much for your company. It has been obviously great. Hopefully, we can get some people back on. The problem is with weather is that unless there's something clickbaity or something dramatic happening, people sort of tend to just watch things in replay, which is cool. So you're watching this in replay. Please ask any questions. Let us know. You're always welcome. Thank you, Mr. Well, again for keeping. I'm not sure. Well, Bay was only you and Mr. Brady. I mean, Rach wasn't here tonight. Oh, Deb's there. Deborah's there. I mean, I knew Deborah would be somewhere there. Thank you, Deb. Lovely to see you too. Thank you. You're always quiet, but we do appreciate you. And you're happy you're watching on your television. You normally do. Rach is probably working. I'd say this time of month she's probably gone back to like her night shifts, what it is. But all right, that's it. Have a great one. It has been lovely to have your company, and we will chat again. Catch you in the morning. Good night.